Welcome to our first discussion in A History of New York City. As you know from the course outline and completing the reading for Unit 1, each unit requires students to examine secondary sources. Those are sources produced by usually historians, and primary sources. Those are sources that are produced in a unique historical moment, a historical period. For example, we're going to examine lots of those this semester. So this PowerPoint serves as a basic introduction to how to prepare for this discussion that we're going to have in Unit 1 and all future discussions that we're going to have over the course of the semester. We begin the semester in the Dutch period. That's the period 1609 to 1664. The documents from this week are some of the earliest we have from the settlement at the tip of Manhattan Island. And this map is a later version of a 1628 map or image of early New Amsterdam. That's the city that later became New York. You see the image of the tip of Manhattan Island here, the fort at the tip of Manhattan. This is where the Dutch governor would have lived, and this is where the garrison of soldiers would have been stationed. You see a representation of a Dutch windmill. For those of you who are Long Island, there's Long Island in the background. For those of you who are interested in business or trade, here are 3 Dutch international trading ships. These ships would have been filled with goods extracted from New Netherland and New Amsterdam and sent back to the Dutch Republic for sale. This is a representation of the North River, maybe you would call it today the Hudson River. On the Hudson River, traveling north to Kingston or even to Albany, are Dutch traders. They're going there to trade with the indigenous people who are also captured in this image here. Indigenous people who reports indicate would come in and out of the city on a daily basis to trade with Dutch traders and Dutch shopkeepers, give them pelts and other goods produced in their villages and exported out of the city. So as we move forward in this unit, I'd like you to keep this image of New Amsterdam, the city later became New York, in mind, because all the events that we're going to talk about in the next few minutes took place on this island and a city that looked just like this. All these small Dutch houses crowded together at the tip of Manhattan Island. As we move forward over the course of the semester, these are 4 questions that I hope you keep in mind and I hope you use to examine and analyze the historical documents that we're going to read. These are general questions that you can use whether we're examining the Dutch period or whether we're examining the period of the Civil War in the history of New York City. So what's the document's historical context? It's a very basic question, but it means what else is happening besides the events outlined in the primary document. Where do the events take place? Is it a particular park? Is it a particular street? Is it a particular later, maybe even a neighborhood? Maybe it's an immigrant neighborhood like the 6th Ward in 1845. That helps you understand some of the events that are being described in the document. Who are the historical figures or characters discussed in the document? Is it a political leader or a governor? Is it a military figure? Is it a policeman? Is it a type of recent immigrant? So who are the people that are being discussed and described in the primary document? That's also a simple but a very important question to ask. And then this is the big question that you should ask every primary document that we examine over the course of the semester. How does the document reflect historically significant social, political, or even economic issues? You won't be able to answer all those questions with each document because some of them focus only on economic issues or social issues like class system or class analysis or class competition between the middle class and the working class in the streets of New York. But they're good general questions that help you analyze each of the documents that we're going to explore over the course of the semester. The documents discussed in Unit 1 all come from the New York Historical Manuscript Collection. These were all originally written in Dutch. They've since been translated by a number of scholars who work at the archives of the New York State Library in Albany. Many of you have been there. You can examine these documents in the James Milne Library or even your local library. They've all been translated and placed on deposit. So you can examine documents from the Dutch period just like historians in the Dutch Republic today or in New York City, or scholars even on the West Coast are using these documents to try to understand what is life like on the tip of Manhattan Island in 1638. What are the major issues confronting settlers? Is it weather? Is it war? Is it poverty? Is it alcohol? What's happening on the island of Manhattan that shapes everyday life? These are things that are revealed in these documents. I think they provide a very good window onto everyday life. So that's why we're going to examine them. Today's selection comes from the council minutes. Specifically, we're looking at the council minutes of 1638. These are the oldest accessible documents we have that were produced on the island of Manhattan in the early Dutch period. And they're from 1638, which is an important transitional moment in the history of New York City. (1638) is an important moment because a series of things begin to happen on the island that forever shaped the city's history. 1638, the Dutch West India Company, which controlled the city and the entire colony of New Netherland, sent over a new leader, the Director General William Kieft. He arrives in 1638 and begins to try to reform and transform the city at the tip of Manhattan Island. He brings with him a new emphasis on colony building. One of the ways that you can best understand that is referring to the reading that describes the conditions and concessions. You might even interpret the conditions and concessions as a new contract or a new constitution, a new agreement between the Dutch West India Company and all the settlers who lived on Manhattan Island or who would come to live on Manhattan Island. It's a new agreement to build a better colony, a better city. And one of the things that we see happening in 1638 is a new emphasis on imposing order on New Amsterdam's residents. Up until this point, if you read any description of New Amsterdam, you would realize that it was a town of sailors and rabble-rousers and traders, people who spent only part of the year there. There's no really permanent settlement. There's no emphasis on building a city or building a town. Rather, people come, they trade, they drink, they carouse, they smoke lots of tobacco, and then they go back home or they go on to other places. So 1638 is an important sort of transitional year in the history of New York City, and it's also the year that we go to the tip of Manhattan Island and get water. In one case, according to the court records, there were a group of sailors who were on a ship nearby and watched her get water from the East River and shouted to her that she was nothing but a woman of very questionable character. In response, she lifted her dress and pointed to her arse, according to the documents. The court and Kieft see this as her acting immoral. Also, Jansen was known to be a drunkard, to be a man who would fight, especially after drinking. He would like to challenge people to a knife fight. Now, one of the things that we know about Dutch culture is that men used knife fights as a way to define their masculinity. So Jansen was known as a knife fighter. Also, Reniers and Jansen both had challenged Bogardus's his morality and that of his wife. For example, Renier said that his wife had sold herself as a prostitute for a skirt. She also charged that Bogardus owed her money, implying that she'd had sex with him, and he refused to pay. Jansen had traded with a number of people on the island and cheated them. He was known to be a gambler and a cheat, as well as a knife fighter. So these are the historical characters that appear in the document reading for today. Kieft is in charge of the court. He's helping to write the laws and impose order on the people. Jansen and Reniers are a couple who are nothing but trouble from the perspective of Kieft. And Bogardus is the new minister who's just arrived in town along with Kieft, and who's supposed to help impose moral order on the city. And they see these two characters, Jansen and Reniers, as standing in the way of establishing a more orderly and more prosperous city, the type of city that people would want to come to and settle in permanently. As you read the documents for today, one of the key issues that comes up over in several different ways, especially in the case of Jansen and Reniers, is that here we see the Dutch West India Company trying to improve the city's morality, get rid of those people who come to the city to drink and carouse all the time, close down a number of taverns, stop people from smoking so much tobacco, stop people from being prostitutes, or stop prostitution from being so carried on so openly in the city. And we see Director General Kieft attempting to exert his power and establish the Dutch West India Company's authority over the residents at the tip of Manhattan Island. One of the ways we see that is he's established the new court system. We are reading the documents from that court system, and he's establishing a legal framework. In between some of these court records, you can see he's passing new laws to control what people are doing. Sailors can't stay on shore overnight. People can't trade illicitly. People can't trade in alcohol unless it's first taxed by the Dutch West India Company. You can see the Director General is trying to use his powers and establish the power of the new court to make the city a more moral place. Also, they're trying to desperately encourage the residents who are there to farm and trade, but also by improving the morality, improving the conditions in the city. They're trying to make New Amsterdam a more palatable place, a place that people would want to go to and live permanently, bring their family. One of the things that they do in 1638 that's revealed in these documents is they say, we promise that we will establish a new school. We promise that we will establish a home for a midwife to help people have children, all in an effort to make the city a more permanent part. Also, as we sort of read through the series of documents that show us what Jansen and Reniers are doing, we find that they're trying to clean up the city, get rid of those people who aren't good, upstanding citizens. And one of the ways they do that is they finally charge Jansen and Reniers and force them to leave the city. Kieft essentially banishes them. He banishes them to Jamaica, Long Island. So he sends them out what I guess you could describe as the frontier of the Dutch society. So in this way, he used his powers and the expanding powers that you see outlined in the documents to improve overall conditions in the city as it's emerging after 1638. So what we know is happening is in 1638, we're trying to make it into a more moral place, a more urbanized place. What was going on before was just a collection of rabble-rousing men and women and traders. Now, the Dutch West India Company is committed to trying to make it a more permanent settlement. And you can see 1638, the year that all the documents that you're reading in this unit are from, 1638 as a transitional moment. So as we move forward, the city is described later under Director General Peter Stuyvesant and later underneath the English will benefit from the things that Kieft does and the powers that he exerts over the settlement.